He called her work ordinary and sent her away, never imagining that the map she held in her hands was the key to his entire kingdom. She was Linnea, a cartographer with ink-stained fingers and a heart full of unseen landscapes. He was Lord Valerius, the ancient master of the northern wastes, a creature of ice and shadow whose praise could make a man's career and whose displeasure could end it. He saw only lines on parchment, not the soul of the mountains she had captured. He saw a quiet woman, not the mind that would soon command his enemy's army. But what he could not see was the fire he had ignited with his cold dismissal, a fire that would burn for 2 long winters in the heart of his most dangerous rival. If you believe that being underestimated is the greatest weapon of all, type vision below. And let me tell you what happened when he was forced to face the woman he had cast aside. To understand how she got there, you need to know about the day he broke her heart. It happened in the great library of Blackwood Manor, a hall of shadows and dust-moted light, where books slept in towering shelves that scraped the vaulted ceiling. The air was cold, a deep, persistent chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather, and everything to do with the man who sat behind a desk of polished obsidian. Lord Valerius. Linnea stood before him, her portfolio held in hands that she prayed were steady. She was the last of 5 cartographers summoned from the Royal Guild, each hoping to win the most prestigious commission in a generation, to chart the Lord's vast, untamed northern territories. The 4 men who had gone before her had been dismissed with a curt, chilling finality. Now it was her turn. She had spent a year on the sample map she unrolled for him. It depicted the Dragon's Tooth, a notoriously difficult range of peaks on the edge of his domain. While other cartographers embellished their work with fanciful sea monsters and ornate compass roses, Linnea's work was a testament to stark, unyielding truth. Every contour line was perfect. Every elevation, every stream, every treacherous scree slope was rendered with a precision that bordered on obsession. Lord Valerius leaned forward, the candlelight catching the severe planes of his face. His stillness was unnerving, more absolute than any human's. It was the stillness of a predator, or of stone. His eyes, dark and ancient, swept over her work. The silence stretched, thin and sharp. In the corner of the room, a shadow detached itself from the drapery, pooling and then receding like spilled ink. Linnea held her breath. "This," he said finally, his voice a low resonance that seemed to vibrate in the very air, "is a work of technical proficiency." Linnea felt a small, fragile hope begin to flutter in her chest. He tapped a long, pale finger on the parchment. The point of contact frosted over for a barest second. "The lines are clean. The measurements are, I presume, accurate. It is a competent piece of drafting." He leaned back, his eyes lifting from the map to her face, and then he delivered the blow. "But it is ordinary. It has no soul." The hope in her chest died. "Soul, my lord?" she whispered, her voice barely a thread of sound. "Vision," he clarified, the word sharp as a shard of ice. "A true map is not merely a record of what is. It is a feeling. It captures the spirit of the land, its dangers, its secrets. Your work, it is a collection of facts. Sufficient for a tax collector, perhaps, but not for me. It is insufficient." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and she felt herself shrink under that ancient gaze. She was plain, quiet Linnea, a woman who preferred the company of ink and parchment to people. She knew her worth was not in her face or her wit, but in the truth she could capture with her pens. And he had just told her that her truth was worthless. "You may go," he said, the dismissal as absolute as a closing crypt. He did not even look at her map again. He simply turned his gaze to the fire, as if she had already vanished. She rolled up her parchment, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence. Her hands were shaking now. Humiliation burned hot in her throat. She had poured her entire being into those lines, into the honest representation of rock and river and ridge. To him, it was just data, ordinary. As she walked from the room, she felt the weight of his judgment like a physical cloak. She did not see the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes as she closed the heavy oak door behind her. She did not know that the master of the estate, rumored by some in the guild to be the immortal vampire king himself, had just made the single greatest mistake of his very long life. He had seen the lines, but he had not seen the woman who drew them, and he would pay for that blindness. 2 winters passed. 2 seasons of bitter winds and deep snows that swept down from the northern wastes. For Lord Valerius, they were winters of blood and retreat. The war with his ancient rival, the ruthless warlord Malachi, had turned disastrously against him. Malachi's forces moved through the mountains as if they were born to them, striking from unexpected quarters, vanishing into blizzards, and staging ambushes in valleys that Valerius's own captains had sworn were impassable. His armies, once thought invincible, were being bled white. His sentinels were being picked off one by one. His supply lines were severed with surgical precision. It was as if Malachi held a perfect map of his domain, a map more detailed and more accurate than any that had ever existed. Captain Marius stood before his lord in that same library, his face grim, his uniform stained with the grime of a forced march. "My lord, we lost the garrison at Frozen Hand Pass. They came over the western ridge, the one our charts mark as a sheer cliff." Marius's voice was strained. "It was a slaughter. They knew every foothold, every fissure in the rock. They knew it better than we did." Valerius stood at the window, staring out at the snow-shrouded grounds of Blackwood Manor. The cold in the room was absolute. For 2 years, this news had been the same. A litany of impossible defeats. "How?" Valerius asked, his voice quiet, but laced with a cold fury that made the shadows in the room tremble. "How does he know my lands? He has not set foot in the north in 500 years. "He has a new strategist, my lord," Marius said, hesitating. "They call this person the Weaver. We have heard whispers. They say the Weaver does not fight with a sword, but with ink and parchment, that they can read the secrets of the stone itself." Valerius turned from the window, his face a mask of cold contemplation. Ink and parchment, a collection of facts. The memory rose unbidden, sharp and clear. A quiet woman with earnest eyes and a map of the dragon's tooth. A map he had dismissed. "This cartographer," he said slowly, "the one from the guild 2 years ago. The woman. What was her name?" Marius frowned, searching his memory. "The one you rejected, my lord? I believe Linnea." A dreadful certainty began to crystallize in Valerius's ancient heart. A certainty so profound, so devastating, it felt like a physical blow. He had held the key to his own salvation in his hands and had thrown it away. "Find out where she is," he commanded, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Find out who she serves now." It took his agents a month of more losses, more retreats. When the answer came, it was worse than he could have possibly imagined. Linnea was not a prisoner. She was not a reluctant asset. She was the guest of honor in Malachi's war camp, lauded as the architect of his victory. She was the weaver. The woman he had called ordinary was dismantling his kingdom, one precise line at a time. And so Lord Valerius did something he had not done in centuries. He left the safety of his fortress and journeyed into the heart of his enemy's territory. He traveled alone, a wraith of shadow and mist, moving through the winter landscape unseen. He was not going to wage war. He was going to confront his own catastrophic failure. Malachi's war camp was nestled in a high mountain valley, protected by jagged peaks. It was a city of black tents, roaring fires, and armed soldiers. But Valerius bypassed the sentries as if they were statues, his form less than smoke on the wind. He was drawn by a thread of instinct, a scent of beeswax, ink, and something else, something that was uniquely her. He found her in a large tent set apart from the others, guarded by Malachi's elite. Inside, it was not the Spartan tent of a soldier, but the sanctuary of a scholar. Maps covered every surface, pinned to canvas walls and spread across a massive table. And in the center of it all, illuminated by the warm glow of a dozen lanterns, stood Linnea. She was different. The quiet, almost apologetic woman from his library was gone. This Linnea stood tall, her hair pinned up with practical severity. She wore simple, dark wool, but she wore it with an air of authority. Her face, once soft with uncertainty, was now sharp with focus and confidence. She was directing two of Malachi's lieutenants, her finger tracing a path on a map of Valerius's own central valley. "The eastern approach is a feint," she was saying, her voice clear and steady. "The real assault comes through the old quarry here. Lord Valerius's charts mark it as flooded. It is not. The water drains into a subterranean fissure every autumn. It will be a dry, protected route for 3 battalions. Valerius stepped from the shadows at the entrance of the tent. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The lanterns flickered wildly, their flames turning blue. The 2 lieutenants froze, their hands instinctively going to their swords, their faces paling with superstitious terror. Linnea did not flinch. She simply looked up, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, the color of moss and earth, met his. There was no fear in them, only a cool, level assessment. "Leave us," she said to the lieutenants. Her voice held a new steel. They hesitated, looking from her to the terrifying apparition in the doorway. "Now," she commanded. They fled. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the only sound the frantic flutter of the lantern flames. "Linnea," he said, and her name felt strange in his mouth. "Lord Valerius," she replied, her tone perfectly even. "I am surprised to see you so far from home. Are you lost?" The barb was expertly aimed, and it struck true. "You are destroying me," he stated. It was not an accusation. It was a simple, stark admission of fact. "No," she corrected him, her gaze unwavering. "You are being destroyed by the truth of the land, which you were too arrogant to see. I am simply the one writing it down." He took a step into the tent, his eyes scanning the incredible work around him. It was a masterpiece. A single, contiguous map of the entire northern wastes, rendered with a level of detail and accuracy he had never believed possible. He saw the impassable ridge at Frozen Hand Pass, marked with a series of tiny, precise symbols indicating handholds. He saw the flooded quarry, with a note in her neat script about its seasonal drainage. "He saw your value," Valerius said, his voice quiet. "Malachi." "He saw my work," she countered, "and he understood that its truth was its soul. He did not ask for fanciful drawings. He asked for reality. He gave me resources. He gave me survey teams. He gave me respect." She picked up a drafting pen from the table, holding it like a dagger. "Things I never found in your service or your guilds." He finally understood. This wasn't betrayal. This was allegiance. She had pledged her loyalty not to a man, but to the first person who had recognized her genius, the first person who had truly seen her. "He is using you," Valerius said. "Malachi does not value genius. He values weapons, and you are the sharpest weapon he has ever possessed." A flicker of something, doubt, pain, crossed her face before it was shuddered away. "And what were you seeking?" she asked, her voice turning sharp. "A court artist? Someone to decorate your walls? You held my life's purpose in your hands and called it ordinary." The shame was a cold, unfamiliar weight in his chest. For a being who had lived 1,000 years, who had seen empires rise and fall, this was a new and profound kind of defeat. It was not a loss of territory or soldiers. It was a loss of judgment, a failure of perception so complete it had threatened his very existence. "I was wrong," he said. The words were simple, but they cost him more than he could have imagined. They were an admission of fallibility he had not made in centuries. "I was blind. I saw the technique, and I missed the artistry. The artistry was in the truth, your truth." She did not respond. She simply watched him, her expression guarded, her heart a fortress he no longer knew the way into. He had come here expecting to find a traitor he might intimidate or a prisoner he could rescue. Instead, he had found a queen in her own court, and he was the supplicant. "Why are you here, Valerius?" she asked, her voice low. "To kill me? To drag me back to your castle in chains?" "No," he said, and the truth of it surprised even him. "I came to understand." Would you have agreed to map a vampire's war, even for the man who finally saw your worth? Tell me in the comments, and if you are not subscribed yet, join this family. Over the next week, he returned to her tent each night. He came as a shadow, a secret that flickered at the edge of the firelight, visible only to her. The camp slept, unaware that their greatest enemy walked among them, drawn not by a thirst for battle, but by a need for something he could not yet name. Penance, perhaps, or something more. He did not ask her to betray Malachi. He did not threaten her or plead with her. He simply asked her about the maps. "Show me," he would say, his voice a low rumble against the howl of the wind outside. "Show me what I did not see." And so she did. At first, it was a test. She showed him her survey of the Whisperwind canyons, a maze of rock and ice that had claimed hundreds of his soldiers. Her finger, no longer stained with ink but clean and sure, traced the patterns of the prevailing winds. "Your men march against the wind," she explained, her tone clinical. "The sound of their approach is carried for miles. And the ice formations. You see this cross-hatching? It indicates brittle ice. Malachi's scouts travel on the lee side of the canyons, and they know where the ground will hold." He listened. He looked at the map, and for the first time, he saw not just lines, but the story they told. The story of wind, of ice, of death. It was a story she had written, and he had failed to read. Night after night, the lessons continued. She showed him how the migration patterns of mountain goats revealed stable paths across scree slopes. She explained how the type of moss growing on a rock face could indicate a hidden spring, a vital source of water for a moving army. This was the soul he had claimed was missing. It was not in a flourish of ink or a fanciful drawing. It was in the deep, profound understanding of the world, rendered with a clarity that was its own form of brutal, beautiful poetry. As she spoke, he watched her. He saw the passion that lit her eyes when she described the geology of a particular range. He saw the fierce pride in the set of her jaw when she explained a complex triangulation. He was learning the map of her as well, the contours of her intellect, the sharp ridges of her pain, the hidden valleys of her passion. One night, a blizzard descended upon the camp, trapping them in the tent. The wind shrieked, and snow piled high against the canvas walls. The air inside grew colder. Linnea shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Valerius stood near the brazier, but he radiated a cold that seemed to drink the heat from the air. He noticed her shiver. Without a word, he moved to the far side of the tent. The intense chill in the air near her receded, as if he had consciously drawn it back into himself. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture of care. She noticed. "Why did you come to Malachi?" he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the map of her own hometown, a place she had not seen in 2 years. "After I left your library," she began, her voice quiet, "I returned to the guild. The story of your dismissal followed me. The guild master called me an embarrassment. He said my work was pedantic, uninspired. I was relegated to copying old trade routes. My life's work was over." She looked up at him, her eyes holding the ghost of that old humiliation. "Then Malachi's agent found me. He didn't offer me gold or titles at first. He just put a map on my table. An old, inaccurate survey of the spine of the world mountains. He said, 'I am told you see the truth. Show me.' So I did. I corrected it from memory, using survey data I had memorized years before. The next day, he sent me a contract, and an entire carriage of the finest vellum and inks I had ever seen." "He saw a tool," Valerius murmured. "I was a tool rusting in a drawer," she countered, a flash of her old fire returning. "He put me to use. Is that so wrong?" "No," Valerius admitted. "It was my failure that sent you to him. A failure I will regret for whatever time I have left." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and genuine. It was more than an apology. It was a confession. In that moment, the formidable Lord Valerius seemed less like a creature of immortal power and more like a man burdened by the immense weight of his own mistakes. She saw the deep loneliness in him, a chasm as vast and cold as the northern wastes themselves. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "He will not keep you, Linnea," he said, his voice a low warning. "When you are no longer useful, or when he perceives you as a threat, he will discard you. That is his way." "And you would be any different?" she challenged. "Yes," he said, and the simple word held the weight of a vow. "Because I do not see a weapon anymore. I see the artist who created it." He reached out, not to touch her, but to the map spread between them. His finger hovered over a finely drawn river. "This is not just a river. It is a lifeline. It is life and death. It is beautiful." His gaze lifted to hers. You are beautiful. The words struck her with more force than any physical blow. No one had ever called her beautiful. They had called her clever, diligent, quiet, but never that. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the brazier. A dangerous hope began to dawn in her heart, a hope she had thought long dead, the hope of being truly, completely seen. The change in their nightly meetings did not go unnoticed. Malachi was no fool. He was a creature of suspicion and paranoia, and his most prized asset was spending her nights in conversation with a ghost that only she could see. He didn't know it was Valerius. He suspected a spy, a seducer, someone sent to turn her. His spies reported she spoke to no one, yet the guards outside her tent felt a recurring, unnatural chill in the air and heard the murmur of a second voice on the wind. Malachi's charm was a thin veneer over a core of ruthless pragmatism. Linnea had served her purpose. She had given him the north on a platter. Now she was becoming a liability, a loose end. He summoned her to his command tent, a grand pavilion filled with stolen trophies and furs. He was all smiles and warmth, pouring her a cup of wine. "Linnea, my dear weaver," he said, his voice like honeyed poison. "Your work has been magnificent. The final assault is planned. Victory is within our grasp." "I am glad to have been of service," she said, her guard up. Something in his eyes was wrong. "However," he continued, his smile tightening, "a troubling report has reached me. A rumor that you have been communicating, sharing the secrets of your work with an outsider." "My work is only for you," she replied steadily, her heart beginning to pound. "Is it?" he asked, his eyes turning cold. He snapped his fingers. 2 guards entered, dragging a terrified-looking young scout between them. On a table, they unrolled a map. It was a crude copy of one of her most secret attack plans. "This was found on this scout, on his way to Lord Valerius's lines," Malachi said. "He claims you gave it to him. He claims you have betrayed us." "That is a lie," Linnea said, her blood running cold. She looked at the scout, who refused to meet her eyes. He had been threatened or bribed. "A lie?" Malachi feigned surprise. "But why would he lie? Unless he is telling the truth." He walked over to her, circling her like a wolf. "I gave you everything, Linnea, and you repay me with treason. It's a pity. You were such a magnificent tool." "I am not a traitor," she said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "It no longer matters what you are," Malachi said smoothly. "It only matters what my army believes you are. They will see you punished. It will be a lesson in loyalty." He gestured to the guards. "Take her to the pens. She will be executed at dawn as an example to all." The guards seized her arms. The world tilted. She was being framed, discarded, thrown away once her purpose was served, just as Valerius had warned. The terror was suffocating, but beneath it, a cold, hard anger began to form. She would not die like this. As they dragged her from the tent into the freezing night, she screamed a name into the wind, a name she had no right to expect would hear her or care. "Valerius!" The cry was torn from her throat, a desperate, hopeless prayer to the monster who had first broken her, and who was now her only hope. Miles away, in a hidden ice cave where he took shelter during the day, Valerius's head snapped up. Her voice echoed in his mind, not as a sound, but as a feeling, a sharp, piercing agony. It was a cry of pure terror. He did not hesitate. Day was breaking, the sun's first rays beginning to touch the highest peaks. a time that was anathema to his kind. But it did not matter. He erupted from the cave not as a man, but as a storm. A whirlwind of shadow and biting frost that tore down the mountainside at impossible speed. The air itself shrieked around him. Trees bent away from his path, their branches instantly coated in black ice. He descended on Malachi's camp like a vengeful god. The sentries saw only a blur of darkness before they were thrown aside. Their bodies flash-frozen. Panic erupted. Soldiers scrambled from their tents, their shouts of alarm turning to screams of terror as the unnatural blizzard hit the valley floor. Valerius moved through the chaos, his eyes burning with crimson light. A beacon of fury in the heart of the storm, he commanded. He was not there for the army. He was there for her. Linnea was being dragged toward a makeshift platform in the center of the camp. Malachi stood there, ready to pronounce her sentence to the gathered soldiers. He saw the storm descending and his eyes widened, not with fear, but with rage. He knew what it was, who it was. "The Vampire King," he snarled. "So he comes for his pet after all." The guards holding Linnea faltered, their eyes wide with primal fear. In that moment of hesitation, she acted. She stomped down hard on the instep of one guard and drove her elbow into the ribs of the other. They released her, and she stumbled back, her eyes searching the swirling maelstrom of snow and shadow. A path cleared through the chaos. Valerius stood there, 20 feet away, the storm raging around him, but leaving a circle of calm at his feet. His gaze was locked on her, and in his eyes she saw a fury so profound it was terrifying. But it was a fury directed entirely at her captors, not at her. "Come to me," he commanded, his voice cutting through the roar of the wind. She ran. Malachi drew his sword, its dark metal glowing with enchantments. "You will not have her," he roared, lunging not at Valerius, but at Linnea's back. He never reached her. A tendril of pure shadow, solid as steel, lashed out from Valerius, wrapping around Malachi's sword arm and shattering the bone. Malachi screamed, stumbling back. Valerius was at her side in less than a heartbeat. He didn't grab her or pull her. He simply put himself between her and the entire army. He raised a hand, and a wall of black ice, 20 feet high, erupted from the frozen ground, cutting them off from the rest of the camp. "This way," he said, his voice now calm, though his eyes still burned. "There is a path. You must guide us." And the leadership shifted. He was the power, but she was the guide. This was her terrain now, her knowledge. "The northern ridge," she said without hesitation, her mind racing, clicking into the familiar comfort of cartographic logic. "There is a fissure, a lava tube. It is not on any map but mine. It will take us to the other side of the mountain." He nodded, trusting her completely. She led the way, scrambling over rocks and through deep snowdrifts. He followed a step behind, a guardian of shadow, his presence keeping the worst of the blizzard he had summoned at bay, creating a small pocket of relative stillness for them to move through. They reached the fissure, a dark slash in the rock face hidden by a curtain of frozen ivy. It was barely wide enough for a person to slip through. "Here," she said, breathing hard. She started to slide into the darkness, but his hand on her arm stopped her. He turned her to face him. The wind howled around them, whipping snow into the air. His crimson eyes had softened back to their usual deep darkness. He looked at her, standing there, defiant, brilliant, and alive, against the backdrop of the storm he had unleashed for her. And he stilled. The chaos, the battle, the centuries of war and loneliness, it all fell away. In that moment, There was only the woman in front of him, the cartographer who saw the truth of the world, the woman he had almost lost through his own blindness. His inhumanly still form, usually a sign of predatory focus, was now a posture of pure, unadulterated awe. He was stilled not by a weapon or an enemy, but by the sheer, overwhelming force of his own heart, a heart he had thought frozen solid for centuries, now beating with a painful, terrifying warmth. "You lead," he whispered, his voice full of a reverence she had never heard. "I will follow." A year later, the war was over. Malachi's army, deprived of its master strategist and shattered by the fury of a scorned vampire king, had collapsed. The northern wastes were quiet again, blanketed in the peaceful white of an early winter. Linnea stood not in a tent, but in the great library of Blackwood Manor. Her library. The room was no longer cold. A massive fire roared in the hearth, and the scent of old paper and beeswax was now mingled with the faint, clean scent of her inks. Her maps adorned the walls, not as trophies, but as art. Valerius stood beside her, his gaze not on the maps, but on her. The year had transformed them both. The sharp edges of her pain had softened, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. The ancient coldness in him had receded, replaced by a warmth that was reserved only for her. He had never asked her to be his strategist again. He had never asked her to map his lands for war. He had simply asked her to stay, and she had. She was working on a new project, a star chart, mapping the constellations as they appeared from the highest tower of the manor. It was a map of poetry and light, and he would watch her work for hours, fascinated by the steady, graceful movement of her hands. He reached out and took her hand, turning it over. Her fingers were once again stained with ink, a sight he now found indescribably beautiful. He traced the lines on her palm, the faint blue veins beneath her skin. "Another map," he murmured, his voice a soft caress. "One I am only just beginning to learn." She smiled, a real gentle smile that reached her eyes. "It is a much simpler one than the mountains." "No," he disagreed softly. "It is infinitely more complex, and far more precious." He looked into her eyes, and she saw the question there, the one that had hung unspoken between them for months, the question of her fleeting mortal life against his endless immortal one. "I was blind for so long, Linnea," he said. "I looked at you, and I saw only what I expected to see, an ordinary woman with a technical skill. I do not want to be blind again. I do not want to watch the years take you from me." It was not a demand. It was a plea, an offering of forever laid gently at her feet. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid, steady presence of him. He was no longer cold to her touch. He was simply him. "I spent my whole life feeling invisible," she whispered. "My only fear was living a life where no one ever truly saw me. You see me." Her mortality was a choice for another day, a path on a map they would navigate together. For now, this was enough. To be seen. To be home. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against hers for the first time, a touch as soft and promising as the first snowfall on a quiet world. For more stories where quiet strength conquers ancient loneliness, and where being overlooked becomes the very source of your power, subscribe to Herb Files. So tell me, would you have stayed? Comment where you are listening from tonight. I stay up until my eyes burn to bring you these stories. If this one touched you, do not break my heart. Subscribe and I will see you in the next one.